from that garden experience, from that time for the next 10 years, you had built such a wonderful relationship with your father, which you described. And then one day your father needed to go into a surgery in a hospital, and then you are there, and just as he goes into the surgery room, can you briefly tell us like what happened? I love that part.
Yeah, this was the most amazing day. My father, they did x-rays and they couldn't tell what was wrong with him. And because the x-ray just showed the whole thing was like, it was painted gray and they couldn't see past what was going on. And so they said, we're going to have to do a lung biopsy, which they did it twice while he was awake. And they could never get a biopsy. They couldn't get a specimen. So they said, we're going to have to put you to sleep and do it right. So he was happy for that because he didn't want any more pain while they kept getting Novocaine and cutting into him. So I was there every time it happened. And so I'm there again, and they wheel my father down into what's called the holding room. In the holding room, there's a holding room nurse who checks him to make sure that's him. And then the doctor, the anesthesiologist, the room nurse that he's going to be at, there's a medical student there, and there's a resident there. And they're all lined up on the other side. His wife is at the head of the stretcher. And it's like, you need to understand that the stretcher, when you see them in movies, the sides are always down. So the camera can just see the person. But in real life, you can't put the sides down because if they fall over, you get a lawsuit. So the sides are up, and Marion's at the head where there is no side. And they say, okay, say goodbye to Mr. DuPré. So Marion leans over and gives him a kiss on the head, but she doesn't move. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to push her out of the way. So there's all these doctors. Now, I had worked at the hospital. I spent 5 years assisting in surgery. I wanted to go into that as a surgical PA. I didn't. I went into pastoring, which is another heart procedure. So I leaned over the guardrail, and I took my dad's hand, and I held his hand, and I said, "Love you, Dad." And he held me like this. He just looked up at me like, "Are you crazy?" He turned to the doctors that were like there. He goes, "We don't do this." And they're like, "What do you do?" He goes, "I'll show you." He pulls me over the stretcher. Now, I've got one toe on the ground. That steel bar is in my stomach. And but I'm going to act like nothing's wrong. And he pulls me down, and he holds my head like Jesus did right here. And he gives me a kiss on each cheek. And he turns my head to the doctors, and he goes, "That's my son. I love him. He's great." I'm like, wow. This is amazing. The last 9 years have been incredible. This is the kind of love he has. And he starts to let me go, and he goes, "No, that's not enough." And he pulls me back. This time it hits that little portion of my rib. Okay? Now it's really hurting. And one of the doctors says to the other guys, because we got to go scrub. And the doctor goes, "No, I'm not going anywhere," because he wants to watch this whole thing. So my dad pulls me in again. This time he holds me like Jesus did, face to face this way. Well, when he holds me like this, he can't kiss my cheek. So it's like, where's he going to kiss? Maybe he'll kiss my forehead, but I don't think so. And I know I'm going to get a lip kiss from my dad. And he pulls me in and he just gives me this big old lip. I love you. And then I go back down. The doctors are laughing and the nurses are laughing. Take me away. And they take him and they start steering him away. He gets about 10 feet and he goes, "Stop." Well, the doctors are walking off to this other room to go into the surgical room to go scrub. And they stop and they go, "Mr. DuPré, are you okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, turn me around and pull me so I can see my son." So he said that in front of his wife. He didn't say, "So I can see my wife and son." He said, "Turn me around so I can see my son." So they turn him around, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and he's going backwards, and he goes, "Love you." And I go, "Love you, Dad." He goes, No. I love you more. And he's not saying it, he's mouthing. I go, "I love you. No. And he goes, what? Now he's being pulled. The other doctors are going, and the one doctor is just standing there watching the whole thing, just thinking, this is great. The nurse that's standing next to me, she's like crying. It's just beautiful. She goes, have you always had this relationship with your dad? I'm like, no, I haven't always had this relationship with my dad. So he then reaches into his heart and pulls out his heart, and goes, like his heart is beating, and he throws it at me, and I put it into my heart, and then I pull out my heart, and I throw it at him, and he reaches way out, like I threw this bad shot. He reaches way out and grabs it and pushes it into his heart. Now his nurse pulling him is crying. So my nurse is crying, his nurse is crying, everybody's crying. The doctor finally goes, okay, I gotta go. So they get to what is the elevator that will take him to the surgical suite. And nurse presses the button, and my dad looks at me, and the elevator is going to open in a minute. He goes, and he kisses the tips of his finger and starts shooting at me. And the only thing I can describe is he's shooting love bullets, and I pretend that they're hitting me, and I fly all over. And then I load my guns. I start shooting love bullets at him, and he's flying all over. I don't know if to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. The difference was I had full clothing on. When he starts flying all over, he's got this little hospital garment on, and the nurse goes, "Woo, let's put it down." So everybody had a big laugh there. And it's just this amazing moment of the most extravagant love I've ever seen one person give to another. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The door opens. It didn't open both ways. It opened from one side like this, all the way open. They pulled him in, and it started to close. And when it started to close, he looked at me, kissed his thumb, put it in the air, and went, "Love you." And the door closed. And I'm standing there, and the nurse she can't believe what just happened. And we go to this other little room, and I said, "Marion, I felt really bad because Dad said I can't see my son." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because he didn't mention your name." She said, "Well, why should he?" She says, "You're the one that was hurt. You're the one that needed to know your father's love. He picked me out of 3 billion women. You're the one that needed to know it." I said, "Well, thank you." And they called us an hour later, because the surgery takes about an hour. They called us an hour later. We got in, and they I'm thinking the worst thing, he's got cancer. He's got 6 months to live, a year to live, whatever. I wasn't expecting that they were going to say, "I'm sorry, but your father died on the table." And he had a blood clot, pulmonary embolism, a blood clot between the heart and the lungs that killed him instantly. They tried to save him. They said we did everything we could. And Marion just literally fell in my lap and began to weep. And I'm holding her, and I'm crying. And as I'm crying, I sense the peace of God. And I didn't know why. I thought I should be all upset. And I just realized when they told me, "Listen, Chris, your father was filled with cancer. It was lung cancer, and he was going to choke to death." This was the most peaceful way for him to go into his God's arms. And that's kind of how he said it. He said, "I know he was a man," because my father had literally given his life to the Lord some years earlier with us. And he said it would have been a horrible death. As a matter of fact, your father came to me one time, and he said, "If this is lung cancer, I did research. I'm going to choke, aren't I?" And he said, "It's not going to be pleasant." He said, I know it's hard, but it was like a gift. And I knew he was right. That's the peace I felt. The peace I felt was that as God's gift to my dad was to peacefully put him to sleep, and then have him wake up in his presence and receive the Father's embrace for the first time in his life, to get really the embrace of God. And I wept and I was sorry that whole thing had happened, but I knew that what God did for me and my gift was to show me extravagant father's affection. And I knew it from God, but now with my own father face to face, I now have, and it's not because of anything I did, it's all because what God did, making me go face to face and then having my father lavish his affection. I know how God sees me. I don't ever question whether God loves me, deeply loves me, cares for me. You know, people say, oh, I know God loves me, but I don't really understand it. Well, not only do I know God loves me, I feel God loves me. I sense it all the time. Anytime I want, I can see the face of God. Whenever I want, I watch my Father's eyes and feel his kisses and pulling his heart out for me. And then I realized this story is not just about me. It's not, I'm not the center of the story. The center of the story is the Father's affection to anyone who can hear the story. I remember years ago, I asked God, what is my life about? And very clearly, he just said, I want you to know my affection so that you can unveil it in everything you do. And I realized my job is whatever books I write, songs I write, speeches I give, sermons I give, personal interactions with people that I have. I feel I got the greatest job in the world. And that is to unveil God's love for people. It's simple. That's it. Wow. So I came out of that crying about my father, feeling the loss, and yet knowing a greater purpose in God for my life.
Wow.